It was just one skeleton in one shallow grave, tucked beneath the soil of a forgotten hill in Europe. But when archaeologists brushed away the final layer of dust, they froze. The body wasn't alone. In its right hand was another hand. Not attached. Not its own. Just a single, severed human hand, gripped tight in death, as if it had been yanked from someone and held like a trophy or a plea. In 2022, a group of researchers excavating a prehistoric burial site in the Carpathian Mountains made a discovery so strange, so out of place in human history, that some at first refused to believe it was real. The grave was ancient, over 30,000 years old, dating back to the time of early Homo sapiens, when our ancestors still lived in scattered tribal groups, moving across frozen tundra, hunting mammoths, and surviving in harsh, unforgiving climates. But even in that violent world, this burial was different, because this man, a young adult, about 20 to 25 years old, had been deliberately laid to rest. His body was curled in the fetal position. Charcoal markings surrounded the burial pit, signs of a ritual, but the right arm was stretched outward unnaturally, and locked in the corpse's curled fingers was a completely separate human hand. And here's where it gets even darker. The hand was not his own. It belonged to a child. The bones were smaller, more delicate. The cartilage wasn't fully developed, and the cut that severed it from the body, yes, it had been cleanly removed, not by animal scavenging, but by a stone tool. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a burial gone wrong. This was a message. But from who? And what were they trying to say? To understand just how disturbing this is, you have to know something about burials in the Stone Age. Back then, most dead weren't buried at all. They were left for scavengers, or burned, or even, in extreme cases, eaten by their own people. But in rare cases, when someone was buried, it usually meant they were special. A leader, a shaman, someone remembered. So this grave, dug by hand in the frozen soil, marked by burned wood, and preserved for over 30 millennia, had purpose. But if that's true, then the severed hand was part of the ritual. And here's where things start to spiral. When forensic archaeologists reconstructed the death, they found 3 chilling clues. 1. The man had died violently. Fractures on his skull and ribs showed he'd been struck multiple times, hard possibly with a stone club or blunt spear. He was not at peace. 2. The child's hand was severed before the man died. There were no signs of healing on the child's wrist bones, meaning the hand had been removed either during death or after. 3. The fingers of the adult were still clenched, even after thousands of years. Death rigor would have released that grip long ago, which means something held it in place. Something like binding. In other words, someone may have tied the hand into his palm before burial, and now the questions become unbearable. Was this man the killer? Was he buried holding a victim's hand as punishment? Was the hand given to him as part of a mourning ritual, a symbol of grief, not violence? Or was this something even older, even darker, a sacrifice, done willingly or not? No one knows for sure, but the deeper scientists dug into the dirt and into ancient human behavior, the more disturbing the picture became, because this wasn't the only case. Across Eurasia, dozens of prehistoric graves have been found with partial bodies, disarticulated limbs, and severed remains placed in symbolic positions. And some skulls are placed between the knees. In others, arms cross over chests that don't belong to them. And in one burial in France, a woman was buried with the jawbone of another woman placed in her hands. This was not random. This was not a one-time mistake. This was culture. A forgotten culture. A dark side of humanity's earliest rituals. And if we can understand why they did it, we might finally see just how far our ancestors would go, not just to survive, but to send a message that lasted 30,000 years. When archaeologists stumbled on the skeleton in the Carpathians, they knew immediately. This wasn't just a weird burial. This was a window cracked open into a time we can barely imagine. When humans lived in small nomadic clans, death was always close, and survival meant doing the unthinkable. And the deeper they looked into similar graves, the more they realized this was not an isolated incident. In fact, a strange pattern began to emerge. From El Miran Cave in Spain to Brno in the Czech Republic, and all the way to Kostenki in Russia, early human burial sites from 30,000 to 10,000 years ago have revealed shocking consistencies. Skulls placed in deliberate arrangements, sometimes upside down, or nested in bowls. Graves containing only body parts, never a full corpse. Children buried with adult bones. Adults buried with infant skulls. And in some cases hands. Just like in the Carpathian grave. But here's where it gets even darker and more real. The science isn't guesswork. In modern anthropology, we use osteology, the study of bones, to reconstruct stories of the dead. By examining cut marks, healing patterns, and bone weathering, scientists can determine if a body was ritually dismembered, if the cuts were made before or after death, and whether the remains were exposed to heat, tools, or even teeth. That's right, human teeth. Which brings us to the uncomfortable reality. In some of these graves, including the one with the severed hand, there were traces of cannibalism. The child's hand bones showed no sign of burial wear, meaning they hadn't been left out in the open. But there were faint striation marks, the kind made by flint blades, or scraping. That doesn't confirm cannibalism, but when taken in context with other finds from the same era, like the Goff's Cave remains in the UK, where humans skinned and defleshed other humans, then used their skulls as bowls, it raises serious questions. And here's the kicker. These weren't always acts of violence or hunger. Sometimes they were rituals. Imagine this. You're a Homo sapiens in the Ice Age. Every day is survival. Every day someone dies. You've seen death 100 times by age 10. What happens when your tribe wants to honor someone? You don't have temples. You don't write. You don't even have gods yet. What you have is bone. Anthropologists now believe that some early humans, particularly in Gravettian cultures, may have engaged in ancestor worship. They didn't bury bodies to say goodbye. They buried parts of them to preserve power, legacy, spirit. The severed hand. It might not have been a warning. It might have been a blessing. Some experts suggest that the man was buried holding the child's hand as a symbol of continuity or rebirth, that he was a shaman, and the hand represented spiritual guidance into the afterlife, or that the child was sacred, maybe even a sacrifice, and the man was the chosen vessel to carry that sacrifice into death. But not everyone agrees. Let's look at the other side, the darker theory. Many early graves with severed parts show signs of trauma, broken ribs, crushed skulls, dislocated limbs, and often, like in our Carpathian grave, burn marks around the pit. Some anthropologists argue this points to ritual execution, that in some Stone Age clans, social punishment was exacted through symbolic burial. Killers were buried with their victims' bones, not as trophies, but as shame. The dead were marked, their spirits burdened by the act. In this case, what if the man had killed the child? What if the tribe, upon discovering the murder, bound him with the child's severed hand as a form of eternal retribution? A literal, you'll carry this to the grave kind of justice. Remember, we think of prehistoric humans as primitive, but even 30,000 years ago, they had culture, they had beliefs, and they had punishment. In one Siberian burial, an adult man was found buried face down, a sign of dishonor. In another, an adolescent skeleton was pierced through the pelvis with a spear, not as a weapon, but to pin the spirit to the earth. These weren't accidents. These were messages, just like the hand. So, what was the truth? By now, we've built two opposing theories. Ritual honor, the child's hand was symbolic. The man was a spiritual figure. The burial was a sacred rite. Ritual punishment, the man was a killer. The hand was a mark of shame. The burial was a tribal warning. Both have real evidence. Both are grounded in anthropology, osteology, and history. But there's one final clue, buried in the man's teeth. When the skull was examined closely, researchers noticed unusual wear patterns, not typical of a hunter-gatherer. He had grinding grooves, similar to what we see in early toolmakers or flint shapers. This suggests he may have been more than just a tribesman. He may have been a ritual specialist, a carver of stone, a maker of tools, someone who wielded symbolic power. And that, combined with the hand, pushes us toward a disturbing possibility. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't innocent either. He was part of something larger. A ritual, a system, a belief. Something so alien to us now, we can only glimpse its outlines in bone and ash. And what if this wasn't rare? What if this ritual was happening all across Ice Age Europe? What if the graves we found are just the ones that survived? We began with a body buried in the Carpathians, a man clutching a severed child's hand. We saw the possibilities. Was it a ritual of honor or shame? But now we go deeper, because the most chilling part of this story isn't just what happened, it's that it still happens. You might think what we uncovered, dismembered children, symbolic punishment, burial rites using body parts, is ancient history. It's not. In 1985, in a remote Guatemalan village, during the country's brutal civil war, forensic teams uncovered a pit. Inside were 8 adults and 3 children. One adult, a man, was found clutching the severed hand of a child, curled tightly against his chest. At first, investigators thought it was a war crime. But then they found something strange. The adult's throat had been cut, not by a machete, but by obsidian, volcanic glass used in ancient Mesoamerican rituals. This wasn't just violence. It was symbolic. And suddenly, a pattern from 30,000 years ago didn't look so distant. It looked cyclical. Human behavior doesn't evolve in a straight line. When stripped of technology, stripped of law, stripped of order, we revert to instinct, to ritual, to fear, the brain's dark blueprint. So here's the psychological twist. What if humans are wired for this? Anthropologists and evolutionary psychologists have long debated the origins of ritual violence, and what they've found is unsettling. The limbic system, the most ancient part of our brain, governs emotion, survival, and instinct. When placed in high-stress environments like starvation or war, it overrides our civilized behavior. In these states, the human brain seeks pattern, control, and meaning, and when it can't find it, it creates it through ritual, burying the dead with tokens, cutting the body to release the spirit, consuming parts to gain strength, punishing traitors through symbolic shame. These aren't myths. They're documented in nearly every early human culture, from the Yanomami of the Amazon to the Ainu of Japan, from Paleolithic Europe to the Zulu of South Africa. And the most haunting part? Children's bodies appear disproportionately in these rituals. Why? Because children, in myth and psychology, symbolize transition, innocence, and the future. To destroy a child in ritual is to make a statement, not just about the individual, but about the group's place in the world. The unanswered clue. Let's return one last time to the Carpathian grave. The man buried with the child's hand had something else in the soil. Red ochre, a mineral pigment used by prehistoric humans for body paint, burial rites, and cave art. Ochre isn't functional. It's symbolic. Its presence, along with the hand, confirms this was a deliberate ceremony, not an accident. This wasn't just a man and a child. This was a message. And while we may never know the full text of that message, we can read between the lines. This man has touched death. Let him carry it. This child guides the dead. Let him lead. This clan remembers what was done. Let the ground hold it. But that's not the end. The frightening echo in today's world. In 2012, an isolated tribe in the Amazon, previously uncontacted, was photographed during an illegal flyover by gold miners. When anthropologists examined the images, they noticed something disturbing. At the center of the tribal circle, placed on a wooden platform, was a human hand. It was arranged upright, fingers pointing to the sky, surrounded by dyed feathers and animal skulls. The message was clear, a warning. Modern people, ancient minds, still performing the same rituals, 30,000 years later. Which brings us to a deeper question. What if the dark instincts of our ancestors never left? What if, beneath all the iPhones, the skyscrapers, the algorithms, we still carried the caveman within? What if the man buried with the child's hand wasn't the exception? What if we're the exception, and only barely? A chilling final thought. Geneticists have discovered that all non-African humans today carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, fragments of an ancient cousin species known for survival in brutal climates. But what they don't always tell you is this. Neanderthals buried their dead too. They used red ochre, placed animal bones, and in at least one case, they severed and buried hands separately, just like us. So maybe this behavior, this haunting ritual of burying a body with a dismembered part, isn't cultural. Maybe it isn't religious. Maybe it's biological. Maybe, in some deeply buried corner of the human genome, there's a switch. One that flips when civilization breaks down. One that whispers, bury the hand, bind the soul, make meaning of the death. Maybe it's not madness. Maybe it's memory, ending. And maybe the most disturbing part? Archaeologists now estimate that over 80% of Ice Age burial sites remain undiscovered, buried deep beneath soil, snow, and time, which means the man with the hand might not be the last one we find. He might be the first. So the next time you're walking through ancient woods or standing atop a windswept hill, ask yourself, what's beneath your feet? And if you ever find yourself staring into an ancient grave, and you see a skeleton holding a small, severed hand, don't ask what happened. Ask what it means. Because the truth is, we've always buried our secrets. We just never thought they'd reach back.